Welcome to episode 4 of the 5S GTE Beams engine build. We'll kick things off with the intake manifold. This is the intake manifold I'm going to be using. So this is a factory Beams intake of the early Beams, the front wheel drive like Ep4 Celica. It's a bit interesting in its construction, so it's made out of steel and it's a bunch of parts that are all pressed together and welded. So I had this sandblasted, and you can see here all these little sort of brazing things. I'm guessing this is the sealant they use to seal up the seam. I'm not entirely sure, but why it's sort of scattered around everywhere I don't really know. So my plan is, so I'm going to run an E-throttle, so I'm going to lop that off and then plasma cut up a new flange to suit the E-throttle and weld that on. It just so happens the E-throttle I'm planning on using is exactly the same diameter as the current one. The reason I couldn't use this is that the bolt spacings are all different. So I'm going to lop these brackets off, get it all really nice and tidy, do my best to weld in here, and maybe weld in here and try and seal that up. It probably doesn't need it, but obviously this manifold was never designed to be pressurized, so I'll do my best to try and keep it together. It's quite a nice design, really nice smooth radius, and then it's got bell mouths on the inside there, so you can't really see most of them because it's dark, but yeah, they all have bell mouths, which is quite nice. I start off prepping the intake manifold by lopping off the old throttle body flange. I'll make a new one later on to suit our E-throttle. I'll also lop off all the little mounting brackets that came on the factory engine to mount bits and pieces that I forget, but we'll clean it up, make it look all nice and pretty. There's lots of grinding involved down here to get it real tidy. I feel at this point the grinder is now an extension of my arm, but it'll all be worth it in the end. I've just drawn up the new E-throttle flange for the intake manifold, and then I've come across to one of my favourite toys. This is the CNC plasma, very useful for cutting out 2D shapes out of metal. So we'll just upload the file and cut that out of 5mm steel. Now I've fished that out of the plasma. The cut quality isn't as nice as a laser, however it's not too far off and perfectly adequate for many jobs. The only little issue is that one there, but I'm not too stressed about that. Then we put it in the acid. Looking pretty clean. There's just some scaling on there from the plate rusting out, but that'll sand off pretty easily. We'll stick it in some neutralizer.
I then drill the holes in the throttle flange and tap them to M6. While I plasma out the throttle body flange, I also plasma cut out one of these little flanges. I then tidy up the holes with the drill, and this gets tapped to a 1/4 inch MPT.
There's the port manifold here, and an MPT to 3mm hose adapter. That simply winds in there, along with 3 others. And then I'm going to weld that to that, and that will provide all of the pressure references for things like the blow-off valve, the map sensor, and the fuel pressure regulator, and one spare one.
I also want to weld up the inside of these runners to the flange. I'm not sure how the pipes actually attach to the flange. It appears as though they're a press fit with a couple of tacks. To ensure that it doesn't warp when I weld it, I weld on these flat bars to the end and then fizz up the inside.
We can see the difference between the press fit runner and the fully welded runner. It looks a bit nasty at the moment, but that'll clean up nicely. That should stop the manifold blowing itself to bits.
I also cut out on the plasma another plate the same size as the throttle body. This then gets bolted to the throttle body while it's welded. This just ensures that it stays nice and flat.
This intake manifold is now all finished, ready to go down and get powder coated. All welded up, all ground back, nice and smooth. She's a very nice looking thing. I think Toyota did a nice job. Hopefully it flows some air. Yeah, now time to go get it coated.
Moving on, I will now make some brackets to fit up my fuel rail.
Now all these little spacer blocks are all machined up and bolted into where the fuel rail mounting bolts go. And then this is the fuel rail. This is off my previous motor. I actually made this from a billet piece of aluminium, which is specifically designed for fuel rails, and then simply drilled some holes in it, put some AN lines in each end, and then got it anodized. It's actually very important to anodize fuel rails if you're running ethanol. Ethanol will eat aluminium, most grades of aluminium, and then you end up with little bits of aluminium stuck in your injectors, and that has happened to me before. So yeah, it's very important to have an anodized fuel rail. I did consider buying one from the States which will bolt straight on here, and it looks like a very nice thing, but I already had this kicking around and it will go to waste if I didn't use it, so it's cost me a bit of time to machine these up to make it work, but once that's all done, it's should be ready to go, and it hasn't cost me anything except a bit of time. So yeah, time to basically stick it on there. I'm going to use 3SG Beams injectors as the jig as it was. They're the same dimension as the IDs that I'm using. So yeah, it's just sitting on the bench here, propped up on an angle, and then I've just given those corners a bit of a grind out for the weld to fill into.
Here's the next piece of the puzzle. ATI cam bell damper. Oh, there's nothing wrong with the original 3S harmonic dampener. These are a really nice unit, and they'll finish it off really nicely. So this pulley is actually designed for MR2. I don't believe you can actually buy these for a Celica. The MR2s don't have a power steering pump, they've got an electric one, hence they don't have a provision for a power steering pump. Fortunately for me, that's not a problem, and I'm actually going to be relocating the alternator to where they sit on the MR2. Before I install this, maybe I'll do something I don't usually do. Let's read some instructions. That's the crank pulley on, which is pretty tight, which is how they're supposed to be. I'm not looking forward to taking it off when that day comes. It's time to mount up the alternator. I'm doing something a bit different with this. So I am going to delete the hydraulic power steering system, and hence the power steering pump. And then instead of the alternator being on the front of the engine, where you can obviously see it, the alternator is going to come around and sit where the power steering pump will. So that's where it sits on an MR2, so it's nothing new for an S series. You've obviously got a big transfer case sitting here, so you've got to be mindful of that. The MR2 brackets are extremely heavy, so what I've done is I've gone onto the Racer X Fabrication website and ordered a lightweight aluminium alternator bracket. So that's one bit of it there. Let's bolt it up and see how it fits. I have also bought a brand new alternator. This is actually off a 1UZ FE. It should be a bit bigger than the original 3S one. It will need to be bigger as it needs to run the electric power steering column, which will draw a large amount of current.
Let's hope it fits. So this base bracket and these bottom bits all seem to work really nice. However, it seems a little strange. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but this mount appears to want to sit the alternator right out here, and then the belt is way too short. So, and also it's going to be touching all bits of chassis and all sorts of things, so ideally we want it tight in there like that as we can. It'll need a slightly longer belt. It's not a big fix, it just means we need to slot one of these or get a new one of these cap. This is the pulley off the 1UZ alternator, and this is the pulley off an old MR2 alternator I had lying around. So I'm going to swap this over to this one. We can see here that that one's much wider. The belt was only a 4 PK belt as dictated by the ATI damper. So this is just wider than we need. I'm a bit worried this is maybe going to foul the chassis, or at least take up more space than it needs to. That simply goes on like that, and put the nut back on. This is our water outlet housing, and it bolts straight on. This is off a Gen 3 3S GTE, which has been on my last few motors. We have a problem though. This hole here. So we have pressurized coolant in here and in here, but in here we have oil. We don't want to be mixing those two. So what they do on the beam setup is this is a drain. So this comes out of here and then down to the block, because the motor is no longer tilted on the side like all the rest of the 3S's. It's upright, so it needs that extra drain. Now I'm leading this motor back. I don't actually require this, so what I'm going to do is block off this hole. So I'll machine up a plug and that'll go in there. Another problem we have is that this surface here it actually doesn't seal on there properly, so it just means that my plug is going to have to sit perfectly flush, because the plug will be sealing across here. So there's going to be a bit of precision engineering in pressing that in. Put this in the freezer to cool it down as much as I can, hopefully make it nice and easy to get in here. There we go, all filed back, finished, ready to go. That should seal up pretty nicely. due to any potential surface irregularities with that. I've probably got a silicone on this gasket. It's now time to install the injectors and fuel rail. These are the factory 3S GE Beams injectors, which we will not be using. They're just plugging up the holes to stop crap getting in there. What I will be using is these ID 1300cc injectors. These are, in my opinion, the best injector on the market. I have never had a problem with any of them, and I've had a lot of problems with injectors of other brands. I have carried these over from my previous motor because there's nothing wrong with them. However, we do have an issue. Well, they go into the hole. There is no room around the plug for the plug, let alone the wiring loom that goes onto it. So what I've got to do is get the die grinder and take a bunch of material out here in order to make that work. And then I've just blocked up all the ports down here just to make sure that no aluminium swarf gets in. After about half an hour of grinding, I've got myself a good little clearance there. The injector fits, plenty of room around the plug. And then we get the loom side. And it's very tight. But there's now enough room to get the plug on. That is the manifold complete. 3 ports here, one for blower valve, one for map sensor, and one for fuel pressure regulator, and one spare there. And the good thing about using these this kind of thread is I can swap these out for an AN line adapter easily enough, which I may do. But for now, this is ready to go on the engine. Just got both covers back from the painter. He's done a really nice job. Pretty stoked with that. Now I'm not 100% sure on which one I'm going to use. Maybe you can let me know in the comments. But to start off with, I'm going to go with this one. That's the engine all completed, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. It looks really cool. Hopefully it goes well. We'll find out soon enough. But for now there's a bit of other work to do to the car before the motor goes in. So So watch that if you're interested. Otherwise, I'll probably see you in a few months for a dyno tune and to see what it puts out. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.